very good evening and a warm welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. We're coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center, the NTV Uganda studios. Now, we have seen newspaper articles, the stories on TV, and had the same on radio and seen more on social media. Gender-based violence was real before COVID-19, and if anything, this pandemic has taken a big problem and blown it up in our faces. If we never paid attention before, we should now, and we should do something. Tonight on the show, we speak about fighting gender-based violence in a pandemic. I'll very quickly introduce my guest for tonight, and I'll start with the one right next to me, Angela Nakafero, who is a Commissioner, Gender and Women Affairs in the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you.
All right, and next to her is Mr. Henry Nixon Ogwal, Director of Programs and Policy at Action Aid International Uganda. You're very welcome, Henry.
My pleasure.
All right, and at the very end, in a mask, we have Josephine Kamisia, who is a Senior Program Officer, Center for Domestic Violence Prevention. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you, Josephine.
Why is gender-based violence an issue in a pandemic, and how does GBV affect women, girls, and the children in our communities? I'm sure we all know the answer, but just to amplify it for somebody who doesn't understand why we are constantly talking about gender-based violence.
We've lost lives in this country. We are losing the potential of women and girls in this country basically because of gender-based violence.
And coronavirus has amplified it.
And coronavirus has really escalated all forms of violence in this country.
Do we know what the figures look like? I know that recent reports from 13 GBV shelters funded by DFID and the work done by CEDOVIP show more than 153% increase in violence against women and girls. From your experience supporting communities to fight GBV, what do you think caused this spike in the increase in these incidents? Henry?
There have already been causes with us. The one at the center actually is the issue of unequal power relations in the households, in the communities, perpetuated by some of the aspects of our culture that still look at a man, a boy as the one to hold onto decisions and to also own property, to an extent where even in some communities women are still treated as part of the property to be inherited. And this, while we have been working on it together with government, civil society, with the support of development partners, even the media, we were beginning to have a little bit more hope. Alas, comes COVID, and the numbers just went up. It was so shocking because it was a time when we were all at home. Children taken from school to homes. And people, instead of being at work, they were at home. And home is where everybody should feel at home, which means safety. But that's where it sparked up. So the reasons which we have got from people who are confessing are these. One, men felt very insecure without going out of home, without being able to be the ones to give money for food and such. Very insecure. Economic insecurity.
So that insecurity translates to beating up people, defiling young girls, raping people?
First is violence against the wives whom they are supposed to protect. The other thing is actually it has manifested into what you are talking about. These men, it therefore means that out there they are spoiling, violating, defiling people's children. But this time round, they had nowhere to go but with their own children. This means we are living with very difficult problems amongst ourselves, which needs really serious mindset change. The other issue really to look at is that children, they were safer, again, out of homes, in some places like school and such.
But you know, we had problems even in schools because we had those cases on.
What is now being demonstrated is that while we have problems with the schools and still needs to be sorted, And the problem is actually can be summarized that where women and girls face violence are all in the places where they should be safe. Women and girl children are supposed to feel safe with the teachers. They are supposed to feel safe with their parents, especially the fathers, whom it is caricatured, it's showed as this is the person who provides security to their family. They are supposed to be safe in the hands of security personnel. We have cases where women who are being rescued, instead, those who are rescuing them were also again raping them. And so we should not take it for granted.
Figures, basically, so to speak. So you also have religious leaders. We have this that has been going on social media. The young woman who was shot and killed by her husband, who is a pastor. So when you speak about that, you're also referring to authority figures?
Yes, authority figures and people who have power over the women and the children. Yes. And some of this power, and most of them, they are undemocratic powers. What
I like is that it is you, Henry, that is speaking about this particular thing and calling out the men, because usually then the conversation shifts.
And I am challenging the men out there to actually accept, first of all, that our own men have actually misused power and our position. Okay. And we must immediately accept that and come out and condemn what is happening. It is when we condemn that we will begin to change. The other second thing which we must do is that we should not be ashamed to actually lead by example. We are raising children in a wrong way, telling them that because you are a boy, you must demonstrate this kind of macho power at home. So we must change that. But also men are doing this in offices. Let's forget about just only the homes. Men in positions of power are actually misusing that power against women. In terms of promotions, what and such, it's wrong. All these must actually be addressed in this country. Patriarchy, which is the use of power to benefit men. You may actually find a woman is in a position of authority, but is just a figurehead there. Men are watching. She must use that power to benefit them. Otherwise, they remove her from that position. That begins from the way our politics is done in the political parties. It goes to our professional offices, in business forum, in the way kingdoms are run. This must change.
Part of what has really escalated the violence against women in the abuse of children, the forms of the defilement that you've just talked about during the COVID-19, is that violence has been normalized and taken as part of problem solving in intimate relationships, and especially when it's coming from an intimate partner. And so it has been normalized that a man beats his wife or does anything or practices infidelity and it's okayed, simply because of the power relations that Nixon is talking about, that a man is justified to do whatever he wants to do or feels like doing, because they are more valued of more worth than women. And so they make decisions and decide what to do. Secondly, because of the normalization of the violence, there is less holding of the perpetrators accountable. For example, even during the pandemic, we see so many cases, but where are the perpetrators? What has happened to the perpetrators? So because of the normalization, there is impunity, that they do it while people are watching and do nothing. Instead,
because just when you realize that most of the people who are supposed to hold them accountable are also of the same gender.
Yeah, but slowly that can change when we recognize that these are injustices that we all have a collective responsibility to prevent and respond to. But because, like you're saying, you find that people that would have held them accountable are thinking alike, and so they justify the violence and then blame the victims or the survivors. They will say, oh, they'll find fault with the woman. The young girls we are talking about of being defiled, they will justify that girls throw themselves onto men. They are spoiled children. They are breaking marriages. But we know that all adults have the responsibility to protect children, and that constitutionally all forms of violence are outlawed, and specifically even the defilement is a capital offense. So there should be no justification as to whether someone will tell you, I wasn't the first to sleep with this girl. That shouldn't be an excuse.
You shouldn't.
Below 18, you've defiled, and it's a crime. So when we realize that all these acts of violence are crimes and perpetrators are held accountable, then that will change the situation. And then, just to add, what explains why the cases escalated is then that the perpetrators spent more time with the victims or the survivors. And so that gave them more opportunity to abuse during the lockdown and during the pandemic. And that's why we see cases going higher, simply because they were spending more time at home with
their abusers.
Yes, with their abusers.
All right.
And
just to give some context to when people are listening to us speaking about defilement, rape, and all of that, it doesn't seem like a big problem until you actually know the numbers. And previous shows that we've done during this pandemic have been lacking of statistics because no one was going out to do the research during lockdown. But there's information here from SAGE implementing partner records, and it's from January to June 2020. And Angela, you said the numbers were more than this, but just to give a bit of context, I see defilement cases 266, child neglect 250, rape 48 cases, attempted murder 5, sexual violence 73, early marriage 11, FGM 12, incest 3, physical assault 1,258. And it goes on and on. And Angela, you say these numbers are lower than what it actually is.
Well, Josephine, we have different reporting mechanisms in this country. That is reports coming from the GBV shelters, 17 of them. But the Uganda police always receive these cases. And according to the report that we've got from the Uganda police, it indicates that between January and June this year, over 10,280 cases were registered.
10,280 cases.
And of course,
and
after
this is both
June,
women and girls, or just
both?
Both
Both
okay.
women and girls. And of course, after that, more cases are being registered across the entire country. I was in Gulu just last week. They were telling us over 800 cases of defilement.
In just Gulu?
Have been girls come to the health facilities when they're already pregnant. And of course, for you as a person who is receiving this girl below 18 years, that's automatically defilement. So more cases are yet to be reported.
Let's take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Tonight we are speaking about fighting gender-based violence in a pandemic, and in the studio I have Angela Nakafero, Henry Nixon Ogwal, and Josephine Kamisia. My next question to all of you, I know that DFID has been funding the support to Uganda's response to gender equality program from 2016 to last month, August 2020. What was this program about, and who are the partners, and what contribution did the SAGE program make in addressing GBV over the years and even during the pandemic?
Thank you very much. This was a program between Government of Uganda and UK8, and part of the program was to promote gender and equity responsive budgeting in this country. I think you're aware that we have a Public Finance Management Act that provides that all agencies that are benefiting from public resources take into account the different interests and needs of women and men, boys and girls, elderly, people with disabilities, and so on and so
Are they
forth.
taking into account?
There's a deliberate effort.
Okay.
And of course, assessments indicate by Equal Opportunities Commission with Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development and Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development have been conducting annual assessments, and they indicate a gradual improvement.
I know that the Equal Opportunities Commission released a report yesterday or
Yesterday.
a day
Yes,
ago about
please. Yeah.
the same. All right.
Yes. So part of the funding was towards supporting Government of Uganda prevention and response to gender-based violence that we've been talking about, and part of that was to establish gender-based violence shelters. And I'm glad that our colleagues from ActionAid, from Mifumi, from SEDOVIP have been managing over 13 shelters in different districts in this country, which are providing really support services to the survivors of gender-based violence in this country.
I've always wondered about whether we actually have shelters
We do.
in Uganda, so it's nice to know that we do.
Currently we have over 17 shelters.
Okay, but
Probably you've not been subjected to.
I think mostly the reason people don't know about shelters is they're also not supposed to be right out there in the open, because then the perpetrators know where to find the people that you're sheltering. FGM in Moroto and Queen has been, silent during this pandemic. How did this program contribute to addressing FGM there?
In this program, we trained teams of activists that range from community members, community leaders, and duty bearers that include police and health workers, as well as some community development officers in Moroto and Queen districts. So these community workers, one of the things that the teams of activists then kept reaching out to community members to help them understand what intimate partner violence was, FGM, and talk about the consequences of intimate partner violence, as well as consequences of FGM and the benefit. And when they were talking about consequences, they talked about the health consequences, the social consequences, and the benefits of not practicing FGM. One of the key things that we found helpful was helping the community members to understand the functions of the female genitalia and the consequences of mutilating the female genitalia. So this helped, one, the community members and duty bearers and the teams of activists that we're working with to understand the health consequences of FGM, but also to demystify the myth around FGM. For example, when we go to Moroto and Queen, there's a bit of silence and concealment of information about FGM. The first thing you would hear is, it stopped years ago, it never happens here. But later we go to learn that FGM happens because there are lots of myths that surround it. One is that women that are not circumcised are regarded unclean, impure, and a misfortune in the family. Two is that when one is not mutilated, so their children are bad omen, the women are bad omen, and that all the calamities that befall that community are related to the uncleanness of these women.
I mean, when you are far from these areas, it is difficult to imagine that we still have those kinds of misconceptions in the year 2020. And like you rightfully said, education about a woman's body parts is one key way of helping people to understand what they're actually doing when they mutilate a woman.
Yes.
How?
Let me add to that point you are highlighting about the issues of misfortunes. During the lockdown, the most difficult issues in Karamoja was actually the fact that the elders said corona, the locusts, the desert locusts, and at that time there was also an outbreak limited outbreak of cholera
Yes.
were all as a result of the uncircumcised women, that is the unmutilated women that had accumulated over a period. So they were like, a pressure was boiling up to within the lockdown round up the young women and women who had not been. So we are living, when we're talking about managing the gender-based violence within the pandemic, this is it. In the mountains as well, because they're saying this is the circumcision year. And therefore, as people are locked down and are more close to each other, there is how to beat the legal system, the machinery of government and all that, to ensure that this mutilation actually happened this year.
The very big driving force behind this is even after FGM was outlawed, but socially, when a woman is not mutilated, she's not recognized, and so even a man who marries a woman that is not mutilated is regarded a child, and so is the wife he has married. So when you're not mutilated, you're a child irrespective of whether you're 90 years. And what that means is that your children are not recognized, your family is not recognized, neither is your husband allowed to participate in any important events like family meetings, decision-making activities, or even leadership roles.
So even if he was against FGM, he will have to participate to be included.
So
the
that's social discrimination.
Push for him to
push for herself in
so
order for the
be
husband to be recognized.
Even herself to be recognized.
Yes, even for herself.
So that's social discrimination that comes at different levels. For example, a woman that is not mutilated is not allowed to sit in even even attending a funeral, weddings, fetch water from the same water source, or participate in any leadership positions. So those pressures, that social discrimination, prompts women or coerces them to get
to fit in.
mutilated, yes, to fit.
So now you can't even really blame them, because look at what society has dictated.
Yes.
And that means they're children and children forever, and children's voices should never be heard.
And majorly, the other big myth was that talking about the female genitalia, or even talking about talking about FGM is regarded a taboo in the communities of Queen and Moroto. So there was a perception or a myth that when you talk about it, you either go blind, you die, or you get mentally ill. So because of that, people have to be subjected to the level that even when you're mutilated this morning and someone asks you, say, I wasn't mutilated. So unpacking all those myths and helping people to see, first of all, like the very obvious one is questioning, who does the mutilation? And the people say, oh, they're known people. Are they all blind? Have they run mentally ill?
Every time stories about FGM are done, it just, police has arrested the people who are mutilating the women. This has been done. But it just never goes away. It just feels like this is something that so many years later we're still grappling with. What do we do? Are some of these the women that go into the shelters?
Okay, yes, some of them do. But what we need to do ideally is changing the social norms and people's mindset around female genital mutilation. The same applies to other forms of violence. Because, for instance, female genital mutilation, people deeply believe in it.
Yes.
So for us to break through, it's about telling them what we are doing is wrong. We need to stop it. And also bring out the far-reaching implications of female genital mutilation to the woman herself, the girls, but also to the entire community, because it doesn't stop with the woman; it goes beyond.
Okay, I know that
we've
FGM
had cases of maternal mortality.
I know that FGM is a huge, and we need to actually have an actual show on it alone, but our time is quickly running. And I wanted to know that I know that some of the shelters have been funded by DFID, and that funding. Did it end? I'm told that it ended. So what does this mean?
The funding from DFID, the UK government, we really, first of all, we appreciate the support of the UK government towards the establishment of the shelter and also managing the shelter for almost 6 years. As Government of Uganda and Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, we are grateful for that support. The funding from DFID ended on the 30th of August this year.
So what does that mean?
However, as a ministry, we've spearheaded a process of looking internally within our resources, of mobilizing the support of development partners. We've really had an engagement with UN agencies. We've had an engagement with other development partners. And I'm glad to inform you that we are not going to close the shelters.
All right. So in the meantime, while this process is happening of trying to engage people, what is happening to the community work, the prevention work that should be happening in the communities?
First, I would want to thank very much the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development for having steered through the SURGE program in terms of providing quality assurance and oversight, for instance, the shelter that you're talking about, but also the convening of all the other parts. There's one which we didn't talk about, which is about economic empowerment of women. We could talk about it more. But the more important is the efforts right now that Madame Angela, the Commissioner, is actually working with us together to get the funding. The most immediate which we are doing is, yes, with the little resources we have, the shelters are open. So SEDOVIP, ActionAid, Mifumi, amongst ourselves, with that little that we have, the shelters are open. With the support also of those districts where we are in. Because what we have not said all here is that these shelters belong to government. They belong to the district local government. And while we are working and managing it, is together in partnership. Therefore, there has been already much training of the community development officers to be able to also support. Some of these support are really working. We are also physically in those districts, and our presence there and the staff who are there are giving in a hand. What we also want to thank is the other civil society organizations with some related functions of providing here the legal support and all that, which is working. What has made this possible, and we are going to still build it further, is what we call the referral pathway network.
Okay.
So what this means is that in the district where we work, while we have the shelter, we have the different institutions, ministries, agencies and departments of government, but also the civil society organizations with the different roles, the police, the court, the DPP, you know, and all that. We work together.
So very rarely we give credit actually to police in the districts and, you know, the district heads, because we're always looking at all the, you know, other things that happen with them. But I think that they actually come into play for matters that are very far removed from the rest of us. Let's take another short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. And tonight we are speaking about fighting gender-based violence in a pandemic. We're also speaking about the shelters that we have around the country, and knowing that DFID, one of the partners that you had that was helping keep them open, has ended its partnership. So we're speaking about sustainability. And Josephine, I think you wanted to say something related in that regard.
Okay, so I'll talk about sustainability in the angle of prevention. In the communities where we've been working, the conversation has been focused on FGM, but we're also addressing commercial sex exploitation of children in Kampala.
All right, so then you tell me about the methodology to address commercial sexual exploitation of children in Kampala.
Okay, So in Kampala, we are still working the way we've been working in Moroto and Queen. We have a team of trained community activists and duty bearers that include police, health workers, and probation officers. And these community members or activists have been doing a day-to-day awareness raising about intimate partner violence and commercial sex exploitation of children, the consequences and the benefits of community members taking responsibility to prevent and respond to commercial sex exploitation of children, FGM, and intimate partner violence. So one major thing that has happened, or the change of social norm that Madam Commissioner talked about, is that community members recognize that these three things are an injustice and that they have a responsibility to prevent and respond to them. So as a result of that, there is collective condemnation of intimate partner violence, FGM and CSEC, where we see community members no longer ignore, they reach out and intervene. They speak and condemn and hold perpetrators accountable. That has prompted some landlords in Kampala to put measures in place to include, for example, in tenancy agreements in the communities of Kampala, where we've been working, like in Kamo Church, Buyebwa, Ise, Makerere 3, to include that when you are a tenant in these houses, one, there is no intimate partner violence, and two, commercial sex exploitation of children is not allowed.
So that's part of the agreement you sign before you get
Yes,
into
that's
the
part of the
house.
agreement you sign. And then several bars and houses or lodges have also indicated that a child under 18 is not allowed. And so if a client comes with a child, they're automatically stopped, and not only stopped from accessing the services of the place, but they take responsibility to even report to the local leaders or police. In Queen and Moroto about FGM, we also see that elders and opinion leaders and former surgeons have also publicly condemned. Remember, they were the ones that were at the forefront of promoting it, but they condemn it, and they have inspired community members to prevent the social discrimination by they themselves encouraging and recruiting women that are not circumcised into community events, giving them leadership positions, and encouraging their sons and fellow colleagues or brothers to marry women that are not circumcised. And also the other thing is that then, because they've been talking so much loudly, they've broken silence about FGM. And so there is now more opportunity for people to talk about how they feel. People have testified about the life complications that they've got out of FGM, and so it has been recognized as a harm, and they are accepting and appreciating the use of the law.
I want to know from you, Henry, how are you utilizing the communities also in keeping these shelters open?
You see, the vision of the shelters in the country is time when we will not need them. But we see it still as far.
It is very far away.
That is the thing. Because every woman and girl in this country should live in a peaceful, secure environment. When we reach there, we will not need the shelters. So what we have found is that a route to that place, we will have to work with all the power and authority holders. That in itself, some of them actually are the gatekeepers of these wrong habits or wrong things that are happening. For instance, there are cultures that really, when you've tracked, you find it promotes these violations, which is happening in form of FGM in different forms, be it economic violation, psychological violation, the physical, which we have talked more about here, because there are really many. That is the cultural institutions, the religious institutions. These are in places where we have strengthened our work, like with the Lur Kingdom, with the Bagwere Cultural Union. They have even gone deep to start rewriting, even where they are not written, by the way, they are norms. They, like the Bagwere, have now written it. And in the process, they have themselves outlawed certain processes. That becomes now a mechanism for putting right their own men and women in certain positions that may be trying to reinforce a behavior, a practice that would lead to or promote FGA, I mean what, the GBV.
You know what they say about charity begins at home?
Yes.
If it starts from your home,
Yes.
you will carry it out,
Exactly.
as opposed to if someone brings some foreign thing to you and said, don't do
Yes.
this, then
Yes.
you question it and you will
Yeah.
ideally be a rebel
Yeah.
when it comes to it. Angela, the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development is really the mother ministry when it comes to these issues. What are you doing? What is the role of it now? What are the key things that you can point out to and say, look, this is what we are doing and this is how we are helping the situation?
Thank you very much. Literally, you've said that Minister of Gender, Labour, Social Development is in charge. And indeed, we are in charge. As a ministry, we've engaged with the different stakeholders. By the design of these shelters, district local governments are supposed to take them over. However, our assessment with the different district local government has indicated that there are different levels of readiness.
Okay.
So we are engaging, some of them have already allocated resources like funds, like the space where these shelters are. Some of them are located within our health facilities, which are managed by the district. So the districts have offered space, some have offered resources, some are not yet at that level, but as the ministry, we are taking the leadership in terms of mobilizing resources.
Okay.
We've integrated the sustainability of these shelters into our 5-year social sector development plan, as well as the 3rd national development plan. So following up on that milestones, we are going to design a project document that we'll share with Minister of Finance,
All right.
Economic Development in terms of funding the shelters.
Very quickly, I want to know the partners that you've been working with and how supportive they've been in the fight against gender-based violence. We have about 5 minutes, so if one of you could just talk to me through the partners so I know who is involved in this fight.
We have so many partners. Of course, government is the very first one. We have the UN agencies. Really, right now we are managing the UN Spotlight Initiative, which is a partnership between Government of Uganda, EU, European Commission, and UN agencies. Alongside those, our sisters and brothers from civil society.
All right.
NGOs have been very, very supportive, and we appreciate the support. Private sector, religious institutions, we are
And the
working
media.
with them. The media, faith-based organizations, some of them you've been seeing, they're implementing programs
Yes.
that are supporting government. So
All right.
we are working as one.
All right. Thank you
I
very
think
much.
the partner that is always left out are those communities themselves. Because
true.
now we have within them,
Mm.
there are the groups of survivor groups that are strengthening each other. They are male champions of actually eradicating this gender-based violence that are coming up. We would want to really
Recognize them.
recognize that.
Just
add
I'm going
on
to
that-
start with you in closing, and I would like you to just respond to this question as your closing remarks. What are some of the key lessons and the opportunities and recommendations moving forward that you've picked throughout the work of GBV prevention and response?
Okay, thank you, Josephine. So one of the key lessons is, of course, that in doing GBV prevention and response, we need a longer-term programming because it deals with changing of norms that takes a lot of time. So a short-time programming may not really make the results that we desire to see. And what that means is that even as the Ministry of Gender, as the mother ministry, needs to solicit funds for longer-term GBV prevention and response programming.
Okay.
And then what we've learned is that change is very possible because we've noticed a shift in attitudes in the communities where we've been working. And the beauty that Nixon talked about of working with the communities themselves, that the communities can do it themselves, and it's more sustainable because then they learn, when they know that this is an injustice and they learn the skill of how to prevent it, the sustainability remains because they know how to prevent it, and they collectively stand as a team to ensure that all forms of GBV are prevented. And then still...
all right, a final one?
Oh, yeah, a final one.
Yes.
Like we've talked about, I mean, one of the things to pay attention to is to know that GBV is an emergency in all situations. Using this current scenario of the COVID pandemic, we can see that GBV was somehow not thought about. And so services were closed as well while we were in lockdown.
Yeah.
And so many were experiencing GBV with no access to services. So among some of the emergencies that we really need to factor in our national programming is GBV to be prioritized as an emergency all the time.
All right, thank you very much, Josephine. The same question to you, Henry, in closing, and very quickly.
Thank you. First one, while we look at the court processes and legal actions as response, it actually has got a very strong signal that becomes preventive. So we actually would want to encourage us to quickly move towards having GBV special courts, not sessions. That's one. Two, as long as women continue to fully or majorly depend on men for economic survival, then gender-based violence cannot easily go down. So we would need to see more economic empowerment of women so that they can take charge of their lives and many things in their families. And I think lastly I would want to say that GBV programs and what cannot be projectized because it's a long haul. Yeah. We need to see a structured funding that should come in the long run from the government system. But since these shelters, for instance, are in the hands of local government, we need to change the trend of the funding of the local government because that local government financing has been going down. We need to take it up.
All right, thank you very much, Henry. And you spoke about the government, so we let the government give us the final word on this.
I would like to thank my colleagues. What I need to emphasize is that prevention and response to GBV in this country is not one government responsibility, it's all of us responsibility. And I'm glad when we get the support of the faith-based organization, the cultural institutions, the development partners and civil society organization and the media. That really helps us for us to take leadership, but also knowing that there are so many people that we are working with in terms of prevention. Secondly, agency is very, very important. Much as we talk about prevention and response, the survivor have to pick up their powers and report cases of violence and seek support. So my appeal to the women and girls out there, please let's report cases of violence to police, to the health facilities, to the religious institutions, and seek support. Because by seeking support, then you'll be able to recover. You will be able to identify the different causes and also solutions. And then finally,
I think the biggest fear for most people who are reporting is that they will not be taken seriously or their concerns will not be addressed as quickly as they want them to be addressed, because they know the danger they're in, but getting the other person to understand the situation they're in and quickly respond has been a problem. And
Josephine, finally, that is changing. Because when we reflect back on cases that have been reported through police and some of them through the shelters, a lot of support has been offered. And I need to appreciate that. Then finally, me and you have the capacity to transform, to prevent and respond to cases of violence. As parents, let's nurture our boys and girls as equal human beings. Let's not subject our girls to violence. Let's not make the boys feel that they're superior and they're supposed to do whatever they want to do. Parenting is critical. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you, Henry, and thank you very much, Josephine, for taking the time to have this very critical conversation. Well, that brings us to the end of our show for tonight. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition.